87222. Start your message with the word Times. You can tweet us at Times Radio or email studio@times.radio. Let's stay in Ukraine because Zelensky said that the long expected second phase of Russia's war in his country had begun. We're just hearing what that might look like, and that Ukrainians would not surrender and carry on fighting the Russian army. William, your column today discusses how throughout the war, Ukraine has forged itself a national identity. That perhaps often happens in major conflicts. But you sort of contrast that with France, the US and Britain, where liberal democracy is under mortal threat. What do you mean by that? What's the nature of that threat?
Well, I mean that, yes, while we're giving a lot of good help to Ukraine, look at what's happening in France. It looks like something like 45% of people are going to vote for Marine Le Pen. And look what's happened in the United States. Last year, the storming of the Capitol by Trump supporters, and Trump is still riding high again. He could even be re-elected again in a couple of years' time. Now, if those sorts of things happen, if people like that get elected, then a lot of our democratic values are in question. People are starting not to believe election results, not to believe true facts, as it were, to believe alternative facts about the world. This is very dangerous to democracy. So I'm saying, yes, this is very good that we are helping Ukrainians in a war, but let's learn from them now about the recreation of their national identity, of who Ukrainians are. We have to know who Americans and French and British are in our democracies and what we stand for. And that means a lot more civic participation, and that is one of the things it means in terms of bringing people together from many different backgrounds. I keep wishing the government and other political parties would support that.
But does it not also, I mean, maybe you need a common enemy, and not just an enemy of, in diplomatic terms, a real life mortal threat to you. That's what creates national identity, perhaps in a way that you wouldn't want to see created in the UK or France or the US.
Well, yeah, of course it is. And that would be true of Britain in the Second World War and so on. Of course, that reinforces national identity. But you don't have to wait for that in order to have a more cohesive society where people of different backgrounds understand each other better and work together more. And political parties moderate some of their tendencies to make sure they can represent the great majority of the interests of the great majority of the country. You can be getting on with these things and trying to do these things in peacetime. And so I'm just drawing attention to that contrast. Why wait for a war to improve national identity, healthy national identity and democracy? And if the Ukrainians had had a stronger sense of that before, they would have been less vulnerable, actually. They'd have been less vulnerable to Putin saying they're not really a country and they're going to let me in if I kick at the door because they're so divided. Now, he's got a great shock. It's turned out not to be like that at all. But he was able to think that because Ukrainians, as I point out in my column, really squabbled among themselves for the last 30 years.
Just a reminder to everyone, you can watch our conversation on YouTube. Just go to the Times' YouTube channel, Times Radio's YouTube channel, rather, and you can see our conversation. Kezia, William makes the point about Le Pen and her popularity in France, the rise and fall and perhaps rise again of Donald Trump. You spend your day job looking at trust in government, trust in the political system. We'll talk after this about Boris Johnson's day in Parliament and the lingering problems of Partygate. Is there a problem of cynicism coming into our electorate about the validity of certain politicians, or the veracity, rather, of politicians?
I think the wider problem is populism itself, and that's what's represented by both Marine Le Pen and by Donald Trump and by other populist, nationalist global leaders, because what they do is they feed on fear and their politics is rooted in one of identity and emotion rather than rational, evidence-based policy making. And that's the thing I really fear, because the minute, as William says, that we start debasing the role of facts and evidence in politics, we're in really deep trouble. And I think we need to fight for a politics that's rooted in that liberal democratic tradition of evidence and truth and fact. And it's very difficult to take on and defeat global populism where it exists, but it's the only route to a safe, sustainable future for us all.
We're going to talk about Boris Johnson, of course, today. Easter break is all over. Everyone's back. Boris Johnson expected to make a formal apology today in the Commons after being fined. And the Commons Speaker will rule on whether MPs can refer Boris Johnson to a formal parliamentary investigation for misleading Parliament. William Hague, I mean, we can argue till we're blue in the face, really, no pun intended, about what happened, what he knew, what he didn't know. But what I found very arresting over the weekend, and I'm sure you will have seen it, was the poll by JL Partners, and they asked people what word they associated with Boris Johnson, and then they kind of put it all into a word cloud. And it's quite a stark image because the biggest word in the middle of that word cloud is liar. Now, we spoke earlier to Brandon Lewis, William Hague, and he was saying, well, actually, it depends who you ask, and I speak to constituents, etc., etc. Is there a problem with Boris Johnson being associated with that word?
Well, of course, that is a big problem. And you'll remember that the last time he made an apology in Parliament about this, which was, I think, in January, I wrote in the Times, I was very critical about that he hadn't gone far enough, that he'd only said the minimum and so on. So I hope he's going to go further than that in what he says today. It is definitely a problem if people don't think there is integrity at the top of government. Now, what you're seeing, though, today, what you'll see with the Conservative Party and their reaction to him today, is they're all waiting on several things. We're in the middle of local elections in large parts of Britain. So Conservatives are not going to rock their own boat in these. They're going to wait if they want to do that. There's still the famous Sue Gray report still in the work.
No, we're over that now. No.
Well, we're not over. We haven't had it yet.
We're above and beyond.
And then the prospect of more fines. And then there is this fresh intensification of a war, which is believed across the Conservative Party to be handling well in the international response to it. So when you put all those things together, Conservatives will be, including me, will be watching him today saying, well, is he going to be able to overcome this problem you're asking about of being thought to be a liar by the country? But we're going to wait for those four things I've just mentioned before coming to a final judgment about it. I think that's what's really going to be going on today.
Okay. Now, William, over the weekend, the Sunday Times, you will have noticed, reported that you helped to persuade Rishi Sunak not to resign. He's had some difficulties recently, including being fined for that birthday cake gathering. What did you say to him?
Well, I'm not going to go into my private conversations, am I? He's a good friend of mine. He succeeded me in my constituency. But I can give you my view, which is that he shouldn't resign over this. He's a very good Chancellor of the Exchequer at a very difficult economic time. We need his judgment on all the issues that he has to deal with. And I really don't think that in his case, which basically amounted to turning up to a meeting on time in Downing Street and then finding somebody was having a celebration and not walking out. I don't think that warrants the Chancellor of the Exchequer resigning at a very difficult time for our economy and the world in the Ukraine crisis. So that is my view, but I'll leave you to work out whether I said that.
I think we managed to get there in the end. Kezia, what do you think? I mean, William said that four things have to happen and then people can take a view. The difficulty here, of course, is that this is coming out in dribs and drabs, and we don't know whether Boris Johnson will receive more fines. Do we just have to wait? Oh, Kezia, are you there? I don't think she is. I think we've been having some problems with her line. We'll try and get her back.
Yeah, and don't worry, we won't take the time to just press repeatedly shout at William until he tells us exactly what he said to Rishi.
I don't think so.
Rishi Sunak. But interesting that's the argument in support of him. And just a reminder that you can witness what Boris Johnson does say, how he will manage to apologise for everything without holding out a hostage to fortune. You'll hear that at 3:30 here on Times Radio. Stay with us. We'll carry on talking to Kezia and William, and you can see this conversation on YouTube if you go to the Times Radio YouTube channel as well. It's 9:21. This is Times Radio Breakfast.
John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio. Join John Pienaar for the Drive Time show dedicated to the news that matters.
We shouldn't be surprised that everyone's predicting an embarrassing U-turn.
Quality journalism, analysis and opinion that speaks for itself.
It's not the most effective of measures, but it has some effect and it doesn't cost anything.
And the views that need to be heard.
What's the next stage? Who knows? We'll have answers. Hopefully some of the right ones.
John Pienaar at Drive. This afternoon from 4 till 7 on Times Radio.
Waitrose believe that low prices are not the only essential when it comes to your groceries. That's why Essential Waitrose British Mature Cheddar 350 grams for only £2 is made to a unique Tor Valley recipe. And 10 Essential Frozen Fish Fingers for just £1.90 are made from sustainable line-caught Atlantic cod. Find hundreds of products in the Essential Waitrose range. Quality you'd expect at prices you wouldn't.
Selected lines and stores subject to availability. Prices may vary in Little Waitrose, Channel Islands and concessions.
Times Radio Breakfast with Aasmah and Stig Abell.
Yeah, we're talking things over with William Hague and Kezia Dugdale on Times Radio and the Times Radio YouTube channel as well. The COVID pandemic has undoubtedly changed the way many people work, especially when we look at the rise of working from home culture. That's on the front page of the Times, where civil servants are very manifestly not going back into the office but continuing to work from home. Kezia, your column in the paper today, you talk about how we've not seized all the opportunities presented by the pandemic to reshape the world of work. And I wonder if that was inevitable. We all sort of confidently said to each other, oh, the world will be very different once we emerge from the pandemic. And I wonder whether we just waited and then ended up with the same world we'd always had before.
Yeah, and that so often happens after big events like this. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk in a second about, the importance of going to the office or not in general. But the column I've written today is a bit broader than that. It's asking about, are we really learning anything about, how we treat sickness and absence from work after a pandemic? And it's all a bit reflective after I had 4 days off work because of COVID myself and realised, in the past, given the symptoms I had, I absolutely would have pushed through and turned up to work. I would have been a walking biohazard. I would have made lots of other people unwell, but I would have considered it some sort of act of valour to push on through. And I just think now, post-pandemic, we've got to decouple that link between sickness and performance. You shouldn't be wearing it as a badge of pride when you go to your work unwell. And surely that's one thing we can learn from the pandemic.
But I think that's a point very well made. But there is an issue of malingering, isn't there, still? That people, if you've got a bit of a sniffle and you knock yourself out for 4 days, I'm not saying this is not about you, because this is about... there's still a risk that you might be transmitting your illness to other people. You don't want a culture, do you, where the second you get even slightly ill, your hands are up and you're out of work?
No, I agree with that, but it shouldn't be a binary choice. It shouldn't just be as black and white as that is presented. I'm just suggesting we should be a bit more cautious and a bit more accepting of the fact that our own individual health has collective compounded consequences on other people that aren't just about their health, it's actually about the bottom line of businesses. If you get to the point where a third of your workforce are off because they've got some sort of illness, then that affects the ability of your business or your workplace to operate productively. So actually, we all have to reassess whether we should be pushing on through when we've got that scratchy throat and that hark and cough, because it could have wider consequences for our place of work rather than just our own individual health.
William, how do you tread that line then? Because that seems to me to be a fair point, but it'd be very hard to administer that. And you don't want a culture, do you, where people get a little bit ill and don't come in and take sort of 3 days off work?
Well, I think we're working our way through this. I do think, well, I agree with a lot of points in Kezia's column. I think actually things have changed more than we might realize. I think it's already the case in all of the organizations that I work with, different charities and businesses. We don't want people to come in when they've got their sniffle. I think that has changed. I don't think that's led to a lot of malingering. And I just wanted to say a very important point in Kezia's column is about people with disabilities, as the person who introduced the Disability Discrimination Act 27 years ago, and the concept of making adaptations to make it possible for disabled people to work. There's much more scope to do that now in this. Now we're much more used to do. That was a really vital point in Kezia's column.
Now, moving on to a kind of related point, which Jacob Rees-Mogg has been talking about, which is the kind of the actual physical presence of people in offices like we used to do before the pandemic. He has said that cabinet ministers should do more to get their civil servants back to the office. About 80% of government departments are found to be operating with less than half of all desks in use. So 80%, just half. 36% operating at 2/3 of normal levels. Spoke to Brandon Lewis about it, and he was quite vague, but I think he seemed to be in favour of getting more people, but that it would depend on the department. William Hague, what do you think? Have you changed your mind about in-person working, or do you think that actually, depending perhaps on the department that we're talking about, it is important to get more than 50% of people back in the office?
Oh, I think it's important to get more than 50%. I'm all in favor of more flexible working. We're all benefiting from that in many ways. But the innovation in an organization, a generation of new ideas, is going to require a lot of the time people to bump into each other, to be physically in the same space. And I think organizations, including government departments, should have certain days when they expect everybody to come into the office, even if it's more flexible working, and that people should be in the office on most days. Otherwise, yes, they can technically do the work, but they're not going to have the ideas of the future. So maybe that's not happening in the civil service anyway. I don't know, but that is what I would recommend. So I think government departments do have to do a lot better, and I think they're falling behind what many leading businesses are doing.
Kezia, what do you think? Department of Education, UK Department for Education, of course, operating at 25% capacity. Is that a problem or not?
You know, look, in the most gentle way possible, I'm not sure Jacob Rees-Mogg was the best message carrier for this. Somebody who's gently chided as, you know, the honourable member for the 18th century is perhaps not the best person to argue for, you know, the inefficiency of Zoom meetings or you know, productivity levels and the relationship with technology. That said, I do think William's right. I think you can organise a workplace in such a way where there are key critical days where you expect everybody in and you use that time really well to do the forward planning, to do the ideas generation that you want to do. That's separate from the kind of, you know, water cooler culture of just the casual conversations which spark new ideas that you lose from working from home. But I would argue there's a lot of productivity gains that come from working from home. The ability to jump from one meeting to the next without the travel time, all of that. It's all about getting the balance right. This isn't just a yes, no, black or white issue. Yet again, this has just been discussing. I'm talking just about a little bit of cultural change that allows us to keep a hold of the very best of what we've learned throughout this pandemic.
Now, let's move on to the most important issue of the day. I'm glad we're doing this on YouTube so there can be a visual aid to what we're discussing. We'll come to you in a moment, William Hague. First, Kezia Dugdale, what do you make of President Macron showing the love rug and the possibility that male chest hair is on the return?
Listen, my initial reaction is that I loved it. I thought it was a fantastic photo. You know, here he is kicking back, trying to show a bit of his personality. And then I become immediately aware of how hypocritical that sounds when I would be the first to speak out about objectifying a woman in political life. So maybe this is just a little bit of rebalancing. This is just about trying to get to the point where we treat all politicians equally. And if that means, you know, rewarding and recognising the strength of Macron's chest rug, then that's a bit of progress somehow.
Now, William Hague, it's somewhat inevitable that we be having this conversation. You're wearing a shirt now. It's buttoned up quite decorously, I think. Would you ever get your chest out in the manner of Macron?
Well, I think it's...
Where's the respect, honestly? Where's the respect?
While I've had desperate moments in election campaigns, not that desperate, I suppose, and it's definitely a conscious move. You know, this is trying to show he's not Jupiter. You know, there's been all the attacks on Macron. He thinks he's Jupiter. He's aloof. He's above everybody. So this is obviously trying to show that you know, that he's not like that. But this is not, for most men, this is not something we choose. We're just born with or with moderate or no or lots of chest hair. I think that there are some men who shave their chest. In Macron's case, that would take a lawnmower, by the look of it. But in most cases, we're just happy with how we were born, really, with what we've got.
Any of your colleagues shave their chest that you're aware of, William?
Stop it now. Stop it.
This is not something When I said that, I wasn't talking about members of the House of Lords, although how would I know? I have no idea. So no, and I don't really recommend that members of Parliament or members of the House of Lords should be asked to reveal these things, because I think it'd be a pretty unedifying spectacle.
Okay, I'm going to take the warning tone in your voice there, William, and listen to
and
that.
mine.
And indeed, Aasmah. Great to speak to you both as ever. Thank you for joining us. William Hague there and Kezia Dugdale for the Leaders Panel, which we do every Tuesday here on Times Radio. People were watching on YouTube, including people in Canada and Iceland. So welcome to you wherever you watch or listen to us on Times Radio Breakfast.
9:32 now. Let's get the news with Alex Morgan.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Aasmah, thank you. Good morning. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the anticipated large-scale Russian offensive has begun in the east of Ukraine. Moscow is attempting to take full control of the Donbass region after shifting the focus of its invasion. The Sun's defence editor Jerome Starkey is in the city of Kharkiv.
That front line between